I'm just a rag dolly. Ba-ba-ba-da-bum. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This video has been a long time coming. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone who suggested this video to me. Thank you, seagulls. The seagulls agree. Today, if you haven't guessed from the title, I am going to be doing a review of Rag Dolly, or the Raggedy Ann musical. This video idea was recommended to me by a few people on my Death Note review video. If you haven't seen that, check it out. I'll put a card if I remember, or if not, I'll put it in the description if I remember, or just search it. The first person who suggested it to me was Lyric Near on YouTube, so thank you so much for this suggestion. The reason it's taken so long is, firstly, we don't have Raggedy Ann in the UK, so I had like no cultural touchstone. And secondly, because these reviews take a while, because I go quite in depth, it was just like just finding time to not only watch the show and review it, but also because I didn't have the cultural touchstone to look into what Raggedy Ann even was, so I could make an informed review of it and of it as an adaptation. However, when I was on the first leg of my tour in the dresser, I had a morning to myself. I was like, let's just have a cursory look at what this is to see if I can do a review at some point soon. And oh my gosh, there is so much to unpack with this show. The story behind it, the whole like cultural exchange with Russia, the rush to Broadway, the controversy when it was at the ESIPA, is that what it is? Yes, I remembered the acronym right. Like, there is so much to talk about with this show. So I'm actually going to do multiple videos on Rag Dolly. I'm not sure how many more, at least one more, but I haven't written the kind of scripts or bullet points for the other videos that I want to do on this. So I'm not sure exactly how many, but there are going to be more videos coming on Rag Dolly because I think there's just so much to unpack with it. But today we're just going to do my standard review. So we're going to do a little bit of the general backstory about the show, then I'm going to do a non-spoiler review, and then I'm going to share my spoiler review of the show as well. So yay. Obviously Rag Dolly is the show of the week, so I will link to a cast recording and also the video of the performance that I based this review on in the description below if you would like to check it out. Also, notes. If I look down, notes. You know the drill. Also, throughout this review, I'm going to be referring to the musical as Rag Dolly rather than the Raggedy Ann, the musical, just because Rag Dolly is shorter. But yeah, it's had different names throughout its iteration. I'm going to be using the name Rag Dolly. Hope you don't mind. So, Rag Dolly is a technically Broadway musical with a book written by William Gibson and music and lyrics by Joe Raposo. I believe I'm pronouncing that surname right. And it is based on the stories by Johnny Gruelle. I do not know how I pronounce that surname. I might just put his name here, editing me, put his name. Thank you. Also, the musical is loosely related to a 1977 TV film called Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure. I watched that film and it's interesting. Yeah, but the important thing to note for this review is that there are some songs that were originally in that film that got repurposed into the musical. It has gained a cult following, and there is a movement called RARE, or the Raggedy Ann Revival Effort, which are actively trying to compile recordings and information about this musical in the hope for it to one day be revived. And the video that I'm basing this review off of is actually recovered ESIPA footage that has been kind of found and repurposed and made available by this movement. The musical was first performed at the ESIPA, which stands for the Empire State Institute for the Performing Arts. It then transferred to Moscow as part of a cultural exchange, bearing in mind this is in the 80s. The show was performed at the ESIPA in 1984, and then it had a brief off-Broadway run before transferring to Broadway in 1986, where it ran for 15 previews and 5 performances. On the video of the production that I'll link in the description, it does have a full cast list, but for the purposes of this review, I'm just going to name the principal cast. So the role of Raggedy Ann was played by Ivy Austin, the role of Marcella was played by Trisha Brooks, the role of Papa by McIntyre Dixon, and General D by Paul Haggard. That's the background. Let's get into our non-spoiler review. I should have had lunch before filming this. I made a grave mistake. Okay, so non-spoiler review. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I can see why it has a cult following. There's some really fun moments in it. It's very whimsical. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun experience. I particularly enjoyed it the second time I watched it to make notes for this review. I think the first time I watched it, there were no subtitles, so I found it quite difficult to follow. The second time, the subtitles had been done, which was such a good help. Thank you to the person who did the subtitles. I think they named themselves on the video. I'll put their name here because I can't remember it off the top of my head and I didn't write it in my notes because I'm an idiot. But yeah, thank you so much for that because it made it so much easier to follow the story. For me personally, there are 2 things that I think are like the standout, and the music is one of them. I think the lyrics are really, really clever. It really is like Broadway musical standard writing, in my opinion. It feels cohesive, even though there are uses of different styles throughout the show. It all still feels cohesive. I also like the use of ragtime, particularly in the songs Rag Dolly and in Rags, Buttons and Gingham. No one who is a layperson when it comes to music and musical styles would notice, but I appreciate the fact that it's a show about a rag doll and ragtime is used. I love that. So yeah, gets points for me. In terms of the book, I think there's really strong writing scene to scene. Again, there's some really funny, witty moments in terms of the dialogue. And I do think there is a really good handling of the darker themes, which caused some controversy, especially at the ESIPA. But I think it's handled really, really well. And again, I think that's part of the reason that it does have this kind of cult appeal. However, I do think in many ways the plot and the structure of the story is weak, particularly if you're looking at it as a Broadway show that is aimed at adults as well as children, like equally aimed as adults as well as children, if not just aimed at adults. In terms of the design, I think the costumes are great, especially when it comes to the toys. I think the toys are very, very well designed. Performances, Ivy Austin steals the show, like no doubt about it. I think she has great physicality as Raggedy Ann. I believe she's a rag doll. She brings a warmth to the character, but also a vulnerability when it's needed. Plus she has great comic timing, like it is all there. A big thing for me is that as Raggedy Ann, I believe her, which I think can be quite difficult with more kind of fairy tale characters. Like you need to believe what's coming out of their mouth and that they believe what's coming out of their mouth. But at the same time, you can't lose the magic and the whimsy. And I think she walks that line really, really well. She still has the kind of otherworldly magical wonder, but still when she says something, I believe her. You know what I mean? She's not so believable that she feels pedestrian, but she's not so dreamlike and magical that she feels unbelievable. I think it's really, really good. I also enjoyed McIntyre Dixon's Papa. I think he did a lot with what he was given, which is not very much, but he feels really, really 3D, and I think he did an excellent job. He struck me as a kind of seasoned performer. It feels like he's very, very experienced. Obviously, he's playing a dad, so he's an older actor anyway. But yeah, I just thought he was great. I feel like the other characters in the show feel very, very one note, and some characters can get away with that, for example, the other toys. But I feel like particularly with Marcella and with General D, I would have liked more depth. General D feels like a very child like villain, you know, like in kids things when the villain is like, I'm evil because I'm evil. That's how General D feels. And Marcella again feels very one note, which I'll get into more in the more spoiler heavy part of the review. I don't think that's necessarily down to the talent of the actors. I think that's down to the book, potentially the direction. I just don't think the book gives them the depth to work with. And I think particularly with Trisha Brooks, I think she's a child actress. She looks incredibly young. I don't think she was necessarily given the direction to help her pull out more from the book than was already there. That's just my opinion. So yeah, my final non-spoiler thoughts. I think it's really fun, really whimsical show. I think the music is great. So if you want some new musical theatre songs, maybe in your rep or just in your general knowledge, I think it's definitely worth a watch. I think if you're an adult, with the pacing of some of the moments, which I'll get into in a second, I feel like there are moments that can feel a bit slow and a bit like, this makes no sense. But if you're willing to look past that, or you have a young person in your life who, you know, likes musical theatre but also likes kind of darker things, you've got a little bit of like a dark child in your life, but you're wanting to introduce them in kind of a more whimsical way, I think this would be a good watch for them. I don't know why I'm thinking what star rating I would give them, because I don't believe in star ratings, but yeah, I definitely think it's worth a watch. Check it out, absolutely. So on to my spoiler review, and kind of differently to how I've done previous reviews, I want to start with specific bits that I like. Some of it is kind of a repeat from like just before, but please bear with me. I really like the music, like I said, it's great. I think the music is incredibly catchy. There's been a lot of songs that have been kind of going through my head. Rags, Buttons and Gingham, for example, Rag Dolly, Blue, Would You Like a Little Music, which surprises me because I have issues with that moment in the show, which I'll get onto in a second, but actually as a song it's really, really catchy. I also think there are some really clever lyrics. There's some really clever rhyming in the Doctor's song, like it's like the second song in the show. I can't remember the title of it, but the one's like, you're sick, 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 blah, blah, blah. There's some really clever rhyming. Again, thank you to Subtitles for allowing me to see the clever rhyming. I also loved the sun and moon banter in, again, I can't remember the name of the song, but the song where they're flying in the sky. There's some really clever, like, I think there's something about the moon saying that the sun will get spots and it's like sunspots, and like, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really clever. Joe Raposo definitely did his homework to really make the lyrics really detailed and really specific, and I really appreciate that. You know, catchy, good melodies, thoughtful use of different genres. Yeah, I really like the music. In the comments of the show, actually, there's quite a lot of people who talk about the music of the show, and I honestly think, if nothing else, this show is worth a watch just for the music. And I definitely think the music is of a caliber that if you're a musical theatre performer, you could put some of this stuff in your rep, which for a show that was devised as a family or a children's show is saying a lot. I also, again, like I said, I like the whimsy of it. This can have its problems in terms of if you're looking at who the adult demographic for this show would be, particularly if you're thinking of it as a Broadway show. But I really enjoy the whimsy of it. I think it's really refreshing in a way. I like Raggedy Ann as a character. I definitely think she's the character that has had the most work in terms of, well, not even so much work, like the most care. She's the character that makes the most sense. She's the character whose internal logic makes the most sense. She's clearly the most developed character, which makes sense. She's the titular role. Along with Ivy Austin's performance, I think that's what elevates that character above all of the others. When I think about all of the characters, none of them burn as brightly in my memory as Raggedy Ann does. I think it's a shame that the other characters don't even seem to twinkle sometimes, but yeah, in terms of getting a titular role that you really root for, they've really done that with Raggedy Ann. I also think, and I'm bearing in mind I'm not in this demographic at all, but I totally think that this works so well as a family show, or as a show for non-English speakers. That's why I think, despite the controversy, I think it worked at the ESIPA, and why I think it worked in Moscow, because the show is incredibly visual, just with the design of it, and the plot is incredibly simple and easy to follow. It's easy to follow for kids, it's easy to follow if you can't rely on the dialogue to help you keep up because you don't understand it because it's not in your language. And also, it has memorable tunes, so when the music comes around, you enjoy the music. I think that was the key to this version of Rag Dolly, the key to its success. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now. I also think the simple, easy to follow plot is partly its downfall, and this leads on to the issue with the book. I want to add this with the caveat that these issues, I think, are only issues if you're thinking about it as a Broadway show. I think the show that they've got is good for the audience it was written for, as I've already stated. However, I think when you're thinking about a Broadway show, you're talking about really, really high ticket prices. I don't know if you do kids' tickets on Broadway, but I know in the West End, the ticket price is the ticket price. They don't do cheaper tickets for kids. I think maybe there's like 2 weeks in the summer where you can get kids' tickets, but the rest of the year, if a ticket costs £100, it doesn't matter if you're buying it for a 50-year-old or a 5-year-old, you're paying £100. So when you're thinking of the cost of a family going to see a show, the adults are going to want to enjoy the show just as much as the kids. And so when you're thinking about a Broadway show, even if you want it to appeal to families, you have to also appeal to adults because the adults have the money to pay for that show. Also, it means that you can have just adults rocking up without kids and, you know, you've widened your demographic. But at the very least, if I was a parent and I was having to spend £400 to take my 2 kids to see a show with my partner, you're damn right I want to be able to enjoy that show without alcohol. I don't want to be spending extra money on drinks just to enjoy the show. Do you know what I mean? Also, it's not responsible to get drunk when you're looking after your children. So that's the context in which I'm talking about these book issues. So the first issue that I have with the book and the plot is that there's no compelling subplot, particularly for adults. There is the whole like Tweety Red Fang reveal, but in my opinion that reveal is kind of too close to the main plot for it to be a true subplot. And also when it comes to Tweety and Red Fang, I don't feel we're given enough time to fully explore their wants and objectives outside of the main plot. It is like hinted at, it's hinted that Red Fang has like a, well, at this point they're like dead selves are Wolf and Bat. So it's kind of hinted that Wolf has a thing for Bat, and that's why Wolf ate Bat when he was Red Fang and she was Tweety. And it is kind of hinted at that Tweety is like General D's bride, and so she's kind of jealous of the prospect of Marcella being the bride. Like, we have no explanation as to why Red Fang likes Tweety so much or why Tweety is the bride. We never see them on their own outside of the context of chasing Marcella and the dolls. So we never get a chance to fully develop those dynamics. The only time we see any of those characters on their own without Marcella and the dolls is after Tweety dies again and Red Fang is going to pursue them through the forest, and he has his song where he kind of has his little existential crisis. But that's the only time we see any of those guys on their own. So yeah, I just don't think it's enough to count as a subplot. One idea I had about adding in a subplot, again, whenever I'm giving these ideas, these are just one possible solution. I'm not saying that they had to do this or that this is the only way to fix what I see as an issue. It'd be up to the writer to be like, do I want to use that suggestion? Do I want to come up with a different solution? Or is it something that needs a solution in the first place? Like, I could go up to William Gibson and be like, hey, you should have done this in Rag Dolly. And he'd be like, well, no, it's not an issue. And I'd be like, cool, you don't think it's an issue, you're the writer. So that's always the case whenever I give examples or like suggestions for improvements. Like, this is just my idea, who am I didn't write the show. But an idea I had having said that, here's my opinion. An idea I had for a possible subplot is an idea of, as well as all of the zany adventures with the dolls in like Dreamland, because I'm assuming that she's like, this is all happening in her sleep, because that's what we're told at the end of the play. But whilst Marcella is sleeping, we see Papa, we see the dad trying to get in contact with the estranged mum who ran away to tell her that her daughter is ill and potentially dying. I think that would be such a good subplot that I think adults could potentially really identify with, like having to get back in touch with your ex for like this really important reason when you hate their guts. It would give us a chance to explore the dad a bit more, and I would love to see some more of the dad. It would give us like a unrelated subplot conflict of the dad clearly not being okay with the mum having left all those years ago because he's an alcoholic, and you know, but wanting to do what is right and trying to find her to be like, hey, I know we haven't spoken since she was 3, but Marcella is dying, like, do you want to try and get over here to see her in case she dies? I think that would be a really interesting conflict that I think adults would be really interested in seeing. And even kids, like, it doesn't have to be like the kids wouldn't be interested, but I don't know, I just think it would add another level to everything that's going on. It would also, if you wanted to, give you a chance to develop the mum character a bit more. If you wanted to, we could find out, did she stay with Rolls-Royce? Maybe he's able to get in touch with Rolls-Royce and Rolls-Royce is like, oh no, we're not together anymore. Or maybe he gets in touch with the mum, maybe he doesn't. There's so many different ways that that subplot could go. And another thing that it would do for the adults is that it would give clarity between what is logical and what is the dream world, like the logical world and the dream world. Because the logic in the dream world, which we'll get into in a bit, is like so random and nonsensical that for me, watching it as an adult, there were moments, again, I'll get into it in a sec, where I was just like, WTF? If you didn't want to change any of those WTF moments, having a place where it's like we're in the real world, the logical world where stuff makes sense and people affect things, would help the adults stomach the stupidness, for want of a better word, of the dream world, if that makes sense. Other ideas that I kind of just brainstormed but didn't develop in that much detail, like you could develop different motives for the dolls, like develop Panda or develop Baby Doll, or you could give a backstory to General D, like I said, with the whole Tweety, Red Fang, General D dynamic, like see them on their own and have a subplot there. Going back to logical world versus dream world, the second issue that I think there is in the book in terms of adults is that the plot moves from plot beat to plot beat with little logic or character input, which for adults or older kids is just not satisfying. I believe this is a hangover from the film. In its like initial phases, Rag Dolly was gonna just be an adaptation of that film, and if you haven't seen it, again, it's on YouTube, I'll link it below if I remember. It's literally just a sequence of random events with like a tacked on subplot of like a French doll getting kidnapped by a captain. The plot of this musical is not the same as the film by any means. They didn't go that route, but I think the kind of just moving from place to place to place to place without much initiation from the actual characters we care about or logic in how they get there and why is a hangover from those initial versions of the musical. Some examples of this, just to illustrate my point. The boat scene when the fish comes and attacks them and then they suddenly fly, it feels a bit Deus Ex Machina because the flying ability is not set up. We see them set up the boat in Mexico, the song Mexico, not the place Mexico. The song is about going to Mexico. But we don't have any dialogue, or we don't see Raggedy Andy add wings or add a balloon. There's no setup of the fact that this boat can fly, but then all of a sudden we're flying. And not only that, is it doesn't actually change the direction of the plot in any way. Whether they stayed in the boat or they're flying in the sky, they're still going in the same direction. So plot wise, it doesn't change anything. And the whole thing isn't set up in any way. It's just suddenly like, oh, now we're flying instead of something else. Whereas if it was like, I don't know, a cyclone, they were going to get sucked into a whirlpool, and so they had to fly, but because they're in a cyclone they get blown off course. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't affect anything at the end of the day in the grand scheme of things. Another moment is when General D and his cronies turn up at random points to provide conflict for no logical reason, especially because it's established right at the beginning when he first comes out of the closet, out of the wardrobe, that he can't collect Marcella until 6 a.m. So it's not like he's trying to get them early and they're escaping. He literally just turns up and is like, ha, hey, me again, you're not gonna get away, 6 a.m. rolls around, you're gonna be mine, princess. And it's like, you could just be, especially when the Deus Ex Machina of the Ring gets introduced, we know that he could literally just chill at home watching Netflix and eating Doritos and be like, oh well, it's 5:59, so let's go get Marcella. Do you see what I mean? It literally happens to instill conflict, because without them turning up, there is nothing to stop them just turning up in LA and seeing the doll doctor. They need to like delay that from happening. Specific examples of when this happens: turning up on the roof in Omaha in Act 2. Why? When I was making my initial notes for this review, I did think, oh, is it because they're on a slaughterhouse that he's there because he's like General D, which is either doom or death. I think in the script it said doom, but it feels like he's more like a general of death, but it doesn't matter either way. And like he's collecting the souls of the animals in the slaughterhouse, like in the abattoir. But then when I thought about it more, I was like, yeah, but it's like the middle of the night. Who slaughters animals at like 2 in the morning? It just makes no sense. And then the other thing about the moment on the roof is then not only are they just like on the roof chilling for no reason, just like we're conflict and we're stopping you escaping, but then after Would You Like a Little Music, the camel just flies away with all of them like holding on to him. Why not do that before? Why not, as soon as you get onto the roof, be like, let's get the fuck out of Dodge and fly away? Why even need the boat bed at that point when the camel can just fly? Do you see what I mean? And yes, I get it, it's a dream, but as an adult, when these things keep on happening, it gets a bit fatiguing and a bit like, okay, now you're just being ridiculous. The logic is changing all the time. Either set up logical rules of the dream and stick to them, and make people act as if those rules are finite, or give the adults somewhere to escape to where they're like, so this is where stuff makes sense, this is the crazy bit for the kids, but here it's making sense. Do you see what I mean? I have a couple more examples. So arriving at the doll hospital, they run around the forest and then suddenly it's a scene change and they're in the hospital. Like, what? Like, it's not even like they're running around the forest and then, I don't know, Raggedy Ann bumps into a sign saying doll hospital this way, and you're like, guys, I found the doll hospital this way. Like, there's literally nothing. They literally just run around in the dark in the forest and then the scene changes around them and they're suddenly in the doll hospital. That's not satisfying. That's not satisfying plotting. And then the final moment is right near the end. They're at the doll hospital, General D turns up, and the heartstrings take down General D all of a sudden. I literally wrote in my notes when I was watching this, why does Loveheart kill him? WTF? This is not foreshadowed. I was literally like, what the fuck? Literally like, what the fuck? Because it's not foreshadowed. It could literally just be General D avoiding Raggedy Ann and her heart. Like, you don't even have to do it in dialogue. Just make it so General D knows that that can be a thing and Raggedy Ann doesn't, and he's like, stay away from me with your love and shit. And then at that moment he drops his guard and Raggedy Ann accidentally is like, touches him with it or whatever. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's just not foreshadowed, and it's like, you could have solved this right at the beginning by just being like, heartstrings, woo! Yeah. All this to say, when you have so many instances of just logic not making sense, and even within the internal logic of the universe you are apparently in, when it's changing all the time, as an adult watching something, it just gets fatiguing and annoying. Either those things, I think, for an adult audience would need to be adapted and changed, or, like I said, with the dad subplot, add somewhere in the plot where the adults are like, okay, we're in the world of logic, we're safe, we understand what's going on. I think it would just make all of that I just talked about more palatable to an adult audience. The third problem that I think there is in the book is the character of Marcella. What does she want? Now, I get that she's sad and she's dying and she's like I get that, and that's a perfectly good starting point for her. She can even like revert back to that. Her arc can be like a, I'm sad and then we're doing stuff and then we're sad and then we're doing stuff and then we're sad. Like, that's fine. It's even fine that she turns up at the doll doctor being a bit like defeated and like, look, we've gone through all of this stuff and like, mate, I'm just dying and nothing's gonna work. There's been all of this foolishness. Like, that's absolutely fine. But at no point in the plot does she seem to want anything, and at no point in the plot does she seem to change. I have a potential fix for this, and this is also to do with the would you like a little music moment. Now, firstly, I think this moment, again, watching it as an adult, is weak anyway, because, you know, the bad guys are just chilling here. Literally here, you've got the dolls and Marcella, like, chilling, being like, well, I guess we're just waiting for the sweet release of death. And Raggedy Ann is like, we need to do something. We need to get the ring. And they're like, how do we do that? Let's sing them a song and maybe they'll fall asleep. But I don't think the plot point is inherently bad. It's more the fact that, like, they're literally right there, not doing anything. If they were villains worth their salt, they would be keeping such a close eye on the people that they're trying to like capture at 6 a.m. but they're not. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's like, in any real world, General D or Tweety or Red Fang would be like, you're gonna try and lullaby us to sleep? No, you're not. We ain't sleeping. So this fix, I think, would fix both things. I think it would make that plot point stronger and more palatable, and I also think it would help with Marcella's character arc, which so far is non-existent. My suggestion for a fix for this is have Marcella start the song. She doesn't explain what she's doing to the dolls. She doesn't do a whole, we're gonna get the ring, so let's sing them to sleep. She doesn't do all of that over explaining stuff. She just starts singing and is like, hey, would you like a little music? Raggedy Ann and the other dolls are like, what are you doing? And she's like, she carries on the song. She's like, guys, come on, we're singing the song. So they start picking up on it and they're like, okay, would you like a little music? Baddies start falling asleep. Marcella's like, great. She tells the dolls to keep singing and she's like, I'm gonna get the ring. She takes the ring, she's like, woo, they're like, great, they fly off with it. Firstly, you get rid of the whole, why are the bad guys not just stopping them come up with a plan? Secondly, it makes Marcella come up with a plan and do something all the way through. And like, I'm not saying this is a bad thing because, again, Raggedy Ann, titular character, we need to care about her. She's the MVP of the whole show. Like, it makes sense that Raggedy Ann is kind of the brains behind the operation the majority of the time. But by giving Marcella something to do, at this point, it gives her, you know, an arc. She's gone from being like, oh, I'm just sad and dying, to actually, I'm gonna try and, like, we've got a plan, we've come this far, I'm gonna try and see it through and get it to work. It then gives her like somewhere to go when they hit rock bottom, lost in the woods, and they're like, oh my god, what is happening? To then be depressed again when they're like, told you, the doll doctor's not here. It just gives her something to do. It gives her some semblance of a want. It kind of shows that maybe she does want to get better. It gives her agency and action, so it's not just like Raggedy Ann's doing all the heavy lifting. I just think it would make that moment a lot stronger and make Marcella a stronger character. I think more would need to be done for Marcella to make her a fully satisfying character, but I think that one fix would get you some of the way there. Because the girl literally does nothing and she doesn't change. And yeah, I just don't think that's a compelling character. Also, seeing as she's the child character for all of your kids in the audience, I think it would be good for them to see a kid taking agency and not just being like, I'm dying, everything's depressing, meh. Like, teach kids that they can, you know, they can affect things and they can do things. I don't know. That's just me. Speaking as someone who isn't a parent. Number 4, are we on number 4? I think this is number 4. The fourth and final thing that I think is an issue specifically with the book is the pacing. And again, I think this is largely due with the fact, I think I literally put in my notes, like, you could summarize this plot as a fetch quest with no internal logic. Literally, the only thing that's happening is them going to see the doll doctor. That's kind of like their fetch quest thing, with like no conflict, no, apart from people randomly turning up, no logic, nothing. And I think because the plot is so thin, a lot of the songs, particularly like the latter half of Act 1, feel like filler. So for example, the Sky song, I can't remember the title of the song, but that felt so long when I was watching it. It feels too long, and I like the song, don't get me wrong. I think some of the lyrics are great. I love the like big Broadway feel, like ethereal feel of it. I think it's a good song, but by the time I got there, I was just like, nothing's happening. Like, I want stuff to happen. It doesn't advance the plot in any way. It's just an excuse to have some nice visuals and some dancing. And it's like, but what's happening though? Similarly with the song Blue, which is one of the songs that got carried over from the 1977 film. So Blue comes basically right after Mexico. So Mexico is the song where they're building the boat and they're talking about how they're going to go to Mexico and then up to LA. Dance number while they're building the boat from the bed. And then they're on the sea at the end of the song. They do some rocking, wow. And then there's like a couple of lines of dialogue, and then the camel with the wonky knees or the wrinkly knees goes into Blue. And again, because not much is happening, like, we've already been introduced to the camel. He's not like a completely new character, he's the newest character, but like, he was there for the boat building. They met him even before that and they helped him escape. So it doesn't feel like we need a song to introduce him because we've introduced him already. And we've just had a song literally like less than a minute before. So why do we need another song? That's what it feels like. Now, I'm not saying, I know in previous reviews, like in my Death Note review, I was like, unnecessary, cut it. I don't think these songs necessarily need to be cut, because I imagine, I'm not actually sure how long the show is. I'll insert here how long the show is, but it didn't feel like a long show, which makes me think there is scope to extend the plot, and I think that would fix things. If you cut down the Sky song so it wasn't as long, I might even time how long the Sky song is actually. But yeah, if you cut down the Sky song, that would give you a bit more time in Act 1, plus I'm pretty sure you could probably extend Act 1 a little bit, and then you could add in some plot elements to beef up the plot, so that then when those songs come around, they're not as close together and you feel like, oh, we can have time to slow things down and have a song, rather than it feeling like nothing's happening, so we're having a song. Do you see the difference? Kind of similarly in Act 2, I don't think there's any songs that felt like filler for me in Act 2. All of the songs felt like they had more of a purpose. However, because of the thinness of the plot, just there are moments where it feels really slow, like the mum killing herself, well, trying to kill herself, for example. I think that's important. I think it's great that it's in there. I think it's handled really well, but it does take quite a bit of time. Like, the amount of time it takes with the back and forth of the mum being like, can you help me? No, leave me alone. Can you help me? No, leave it alone. Raggedy Ann being like, oh, I can do the knot. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, I've got to go and get Andy. There's just so much business making that moment long, but like, it doesn't advance the plot in any way. I think what the show as a whole needs, especially thinking of it as a Broadway show where adults need to be just as entertained as kids, is beef up the plot, make the plot more robust, more interesting, less thin, and then you can trim down moments that have been extended for filler, or you can actually get to a point where like we feel like we need a song now, rather than we need a song because it's not long enough. I want the Sky Song and Blues to stay in. I think they're great songs. It's just that in the plot as is, it just feels a bit like, okay. Like, I don't want to be feeling like that when there's a song that's as great as Blue and as great as the Sky Song. I want to feel like, yes, we've got to this song, I can just sit back and enjoy it. It's nice to have a breather from the plot that's happening, you know? Or it's nice to have a moment that's advancing the plot that's happening. The next thing I want to talk about is the cultural insensitivity, because yay, the 80s. Yeah, there's a couple of things, both of which were flagged in the description of the show recording that I reviewed. The first thing is Panda. Panda makes me uncomfortable, and this is someone who isn't of East Asian heritage. Like, I found Panda really uncomfortable. Simple fix, just make Panda a regular teddy bear. And it can be an old teddy bear, like the teddy bear is old and so has a lot of life experience, and you know, so it can be like, you know, back in my day, I found that this was a thing, time's an illusion, or whatever kind of Confucian insights Panda gives us. But just the way Panda's written, the fact that Panda isn't played by an East Asian character, which, to be honest, I don't know if that would make it better. It would be better in terms of, like, you know, East Asian actor representation, but also I was thinking of it in terms of, like, if they had like a toy lion and they had a black actor playing this toy lion and they were talking in a really bad Ugandan accent or Nigerian accent or something. I don't even think there's pandas in Nigeria. Not pandas. I don't even think there's lions in Nigeria. Or like talking with random clicks and stuff, and like, would I think that's okay just because the actor was black? No, I wouldn't. I'd be like, yeah, it's still kind of racist. So I don't think casting Panda as an East Asian actor would make it better. I think you just have to make Panda not a panda, just make Panda a bear, and everything would be okay. And then still cast East Asian actors, because, you know, representation, East Asian actors can play any kind of toy you want. But yeah, no, Panda's not okay. Oh, the 80s. Wow, the 80s. The other thing that was mentioned in the description of the video was the song Mexico, and that being a culturally insensitive or out of date depiction moment. I can't really speak on this because in the UK we don't really have that kind of racial or cultural divide. Like, how can I explain this? Like, it's just not on our cultural racial radar. If someone from Latin America who speaks Spanish was to come to the UK, we'd probably just assume you were from Spain. Our relationship with Spain isn't like a racial one, it's more of a cultural one with like, we're basically, I say we, the Gammons would hate you for being European. They wouldn't hate you for being Latino or Hispanic or whatever. Do you see what I mean? So we don't have that same relationship with how we view people from Latin America or of Latin American descent. So I can't speak to how insensitive Mexico is as a song. However, if it says it in the description that it is insensitive, I'm going to trust that, because, you know, people in the Americas would know better than I would, being here in the UK. And so if changes would need to be made to that number, then changes should be made to that number. Also, I think it's more important that it's addressed with the sensitivities of the US, because in all honesty, I can't see Raggedy Ann or Rag Dolly doing well in the UK because we don't have Raggedy Ann in our culture. No one would come and see it. So I think it's more important that in terms of an American audience, the depictions of different races and cultures is respectful according to that context than the context in the UK, if that makes sense. So that's all I want to say about that. So before I get on to my final thoughts, I do want to end with specific bits that I liked, because I do like ending my spoiler part of the review with this bit, because it's just fun to like reminisce about the bits where I was like, yeah, I liked that. So here are the bits that I liked. Number one, oh my gosh, this is so funny. Number one is Baby Doll's line. General D goes back and like the set changes and everyone's screaming and they're on the floor and they're like, oh, what happened? And then Baby Doll, who before this, apart from a few lines in a song, essentially she can't talk because she's a baby. And then she just, everyone's like, oh, what happened? Where did the general go? And she just goes, it was all a bizarre illusion. And that just cracked me up. That line and the way the actress, I didn't write her name down, I'll put the name of the actress here, but that was completely my kind of humor and I cracked up. Love that line, love that moment. I'm paraphrasing the line, but when Raggedy Ann asks Marcella to be, and is like, have you had a brother? And she's like, no. And Raggedy Ann's like, don't. Classic moment. Turning the bed into the boat. I really like that moment. Firstly, because again, the whimsy of it. I love the whimsy. But also I like how it was a real show don't tell way of developing Andy's character. Like he's the one who makes stuff. He builds things. He doesn't do it again. But I just really enjoy that moment. Culturally insensitive song notwithstanding. The Rags Buttons reprise at the start of Act 2. And also the motif that it starts with the dun 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 dun, like that's actually from a song that comes later in Act 2, so I like that tying in. And also just kind of the sinister vibes of that opening. I really like it. Like you've got the mirroring of the two different openings with like the ensemble who are kind of the Rag Doll storytellers, like starting Act 2 again, but it's like, oh, things are getting dark, things are getting scary. I really liked that. It's a simple thing, but I enjoyed it. Tweety's death, as in like her second death, Bat's death, I guess technically. I wrote in my notes, hella dark. It is hella dark, but I kind of like it. Also, another quote from my initial notes watching it, lol at the rag dolls helping mama commit suicide. Which, yeah, obviously it's not like actually lol, a woman is trying to kill herself, but again, I just love the writing of that moment, the fact that Raggedy Ann is so clueless as to what is happening and she's just trying to be helpful because that's what she does. And there's this poor woman just being like, look, either help me tie a noose or fuck off. I just found that really funny. Not in a ha 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 funny way, but like I just really, I liked it. It was like, it's funny, but oh, it's dark. And yeah. And again, I think that's what I like about the handling of the darker themes in this show. It's not in your face. It's not sugarcoating it. It's like the darker moments can stand as they are because you've got the sugar of the whimsy, if that makes sense. And I just really like that. I feel like it's not trying to like swaddle or mollycoddle the children it's aimed at, with the fact that, yeah, you know, parents can be messed up and death happens and people die and sometimes it's sad and there's nothing you can do. Sometimes people reach the end of their rope, literally, you know. Sometimes parents do things that hurt us and they regret it. It doesn't sugarcoat any of that stuff. It just says it as it is because, you know, Raggedy Ann being a loving doll trying to get them on a boat made out of a bed to the doll doctor and not giving up, that's like the sugar. I really like that. And yeah, I really do. But also lol at her just like unknowingly trying to help a woman commit suicide, and then her reaction when she realizes, and she's like, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, Anne, read the signs, read the room. I also like the one thing that was foreshadowed in this whole show. I really like the twist that Raggedy Ann was actually the doll or the person that General D was coming for. So right at the beginning, when General D comes out of the wardrobe, he goes up to Raggedy Ann, and is like, you're the one I'm coming for. And she's like, and then Marcella is like, no, it's me. I'm the one who's dying. Fast forward to the end, and it's like, oh, the thing that what's killing Marcella is she has a broken heart and she needs a new one. Everyone's like, Raggedy Ann has one, and she's like, but I only have the one. But have it. And because Raggedy Ann gives Marcella the heart to eat, Raggedy Ann has to die and General D comes for her at 6 in the morning. I liked that twist at the end. I thought it was really, really sweet and really heartfelt, the fact that Raggedy Ann sacrifices herself for Marcella. And also it's foreshadowed, so I wasn't like, oh, that's just a random Deus Ex Machina. I was like, oh no, from the beginning that was meant to be it. They just all got confused because Marcella was dying. So yes, I enjoyed that. So my final thoughts on Raggedy Ann the musical, and I want to discuss the question of a revival. Do I think in general Raggedy Ann deserves a revival? Yes, I do. I think you need to change Panda and, you know, trusting on what Americans have said, change Mexico so both of those things are less culturally icky. But I do think it deserves a revival. I think it's a great show for kids. I think it's a great show for families. I think it deserves another life. Clearly there was an audience for it off of Broadway because it did do well off of Broadway. And I don't see why it couldn't have another life again. In terms of a Broadway revival, I think the show that exists right now, I don't think works as a Broadway show, which might upset some people who are massive fans of the musical, but let me explain, and I've already touched on this. If as a family you're seeing a show at your local theatre aimed at families, kind of the stereotypical perfect family, 2 adults, 2 kids going to see a show. At your local theatre they might do child tickets, so let's say it's £10 a ticket for each of the kids, £20 for the adults. That's £60 you're spending on going to the theatre. If it's in your local area at your local theatre, you're not paying that much for travel. You probably don't have to pay that much for food. You might treat yourselves to eating out at McDonald's or whatever. You know, you don't have to pay for accommodation because you're going to go home. For a family who aren't living paycheck to paycheck, who aren't on the breadline, if they're doing that like once for one of their kids' birthdays, that's not a lot of money to be paying out. And so as an adult, I feel like you could justify that cost even if you're not going to enjoy it. As long as your kids have a good time, it's like, hey, it's their birthday or whatever, they really want to see this show. You know, there are some cute moments, there's some good music. It's a bit boring for us, but the kids are loving it, and that's all we care about, because it's not so expensive that you're like, wow, you know, I paid like an arm and a leg for this. You see what I mean? With a Broadway show, I'm using pounds, sorry, it's my currency, just you do the conversions in your head. For a Broadway show or a West End show, if you're spending £100 a ticket, again, £100 times 4, that's 400. I'm just gonna use West End because I know the extended costs more, but like obviously apply this to America. But let's say Raggedy Ann in some weird universe was on in the West End. £100 a ticket, that's £400 to take 4 people. You've then got to get into London. You can't park in London, so you're getting the train. That's another at least £100 for 4 people, depending on how far you're going. If you're coming from really far, that could easily be like £200 just to get into London. If you're coming from that far, you're probably going to have to stay overnight, or if you can't rush for the last train. So let's say you're staying in a hotel and then you've got to buy food because you're coming so far down. It's not like you can eat before you go to the theatre. Like, that is a lot of money that that family is spending on seeing this show. And so as an adult, if I'm paying out £1,000 for this one night out with my family, I'm going to want to enjoy the show just as much as my kids do, which means there's got to be stuff in the show for me to enjoy. The version of Raggedy Ann that's on at the moment, unless you're an adult who is part of this movement to revive it, and so like you've committed, like you'll ride and die for this show, just your average person who's like a casual theatre goer, doesn't really, you know, have a special bond with Raggedy Ann, doesn't know the history of the show, hasn't got emotionally invested in the show, just literally wants something to take their kids to, I think it's highly unlikely that every single person in that situation is going to come away being like, I absolutely enjoyed that show. The pacing was great. There were no times I was bored. There wasn't a time when I was confused by the logic. I think the vast majority of adults seeing this musical would not have that experience. And so from a production standpoint, as a producer, if I was looking to produce this show on Broadway, I would struggle to see the demographic that would be able to make it make money. I think this is also shown in the reviews of the Broadway show, which I'm not going to get too into this, again, future video. I don't think the reviews were fair. I think oftentimes reviews, especially of things like family shows or really niche things, are not fair because they review for themselves, not for the intended audience. So I don't think the Broadway reviews were fair, but I do think it shows that for adult viewers, and critics are adults, this show wouldn't have done a lot for them. Does that make sense? I think there is a Broadway show in this. I think the music is good enough for a Broadway show. And I think with some redrafting and rewriting of the show to make the plot more substantial and more engaging for an older audience, for an adult audience, or even like older kids. I think some older kids would get bored with this. I think there is a Broadway show in this. There are other ways that Broadway shows aimed at families can appeal to the adults. You can do it with spectacle. Another way you can do it is celebrities. People will go and see a show if their favourite celeb is in it. I don't think those two things alone would make this a viable Broadway show. I think the plot itself would need some rewriting and reworking. If the writing team were willing to do that, I think that, especially on Broadway for an American audience, I think this could be a successful Broadway show. I think especially if they could harness the cult following it has with some creative marketing and some reworking, and with a producing team, a producer that knew how to harness what was special about this show and make it appeal to the mainstream, I think this could be a successful Broadway show. So yeah, so that's my opinion on Raggedy Ann. I hope I didn't offend or upset anyone with that opinion. I know that this show is very close to people's hearts, but from looking at it objectively as someone who works in theatre and who has an idea of what is needed to make a show successful on the West End or Broadway, I think a Broadway Rag Dolly would not have to be a different story and in essence would be the same show, but it would basically be an adaptation of this. I think you'd have to adapt this musical into a Broadway musical to make it work on Broadway, if that makes sense. I also, just before I sign off on this video, I think this is a textbook example of how a good show, a successful show, a show that captures the hearts and minds of people doesn't necessarily mean that it's a Broadway show or it's a West End show. And I've always been of the opinion that, you know, Broadway or the West End should not be the be-all and end-all. Broadway and the West End have specific demographics. Demographics who can afford the ticket prices. Demographics who, you know, appreciate that kind of theatre, appreciate the exclusivity, appreciate the size and scale. That's not going to work for like a family of 5-year-olds. Obviously, they won't all be 5-year-olds, there'll be some adults involved in that, but you know what I mean? Like, a 5-year-old isn't necessarily going to appreciate a Broadway show. You know, someone with access needs isn't going to necessarily appreciate the atmosphere of a Broadway theatre. That doesn't mean that the shows that appeal to those audiences are bad shows or don't have the same artistic merit as a Broadway show. Oftentimes the stuff that's happening off Broadway and off West End has way more artistic merit than what's on Broadway and on the West End, where the bottom line is profit. So I guess what I want to leave you with is that even though Rag Dolly in its current iteration is not, in my opinion, a successful Broadway show, does not have the makings of a successful Broadway show, that doesn't mean that the show inherently is a bad show, not worthy of all the love and support that its fan base and its audience has for it, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's that on that. Let's do the outro. So that was my review of Rag Dolly, the Raggedy Ann musical. Like I said, I do want to do more videos just about the history and the context of this show because it is fascinating to me, so stay tuned for that. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Would love to have you on the channel. Come on down. Stay tuned for more theatre content from a UK perspective, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye friends!